Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Kentucky. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. The winter of 1879 was colder than most in the valleys of eastern Kentucky. Along the low ridges of Clay County, snow clung to fences and roofs for weeks at a time, muting the sound of travel. It was there, on the outer edge of the township, that a man calling himself Dr. Elias Marston arrived with his young wife, Beatrice. They purchased a weather-worn farmstead once belonging to the Caldwell family, paying in full with no witnesses to the exchange. The county clerk later remarked that the deed was uncommonly brief. No witnesses, no attorney, only a signature in unfamiliar ink. At first, no one questioned them. Newcomers were rare, but not impossible. Elias told neighbors he had trained as a physician in Lexington and had come seeking quiet to continue his private studies. Kentucky's medical profession was still recovering from decades of war and mismanagement, a period described in later records of medicine in Kentucky as one of experiment and confusion. That reference would later be used by researchers attempting to place Marston's work within the darker fringes of provincial medicine. Beatrice was seldom seen. Those who caught a glimpse said she kept her hair tied high, her eyes fixed on the ground. The Marstons declined church invitations, refused visiting ministers, and fenced off their property with crude timber stakes. Children who strayed near the fence claimed they heard a rhythmic humming from beneath the earth, something that beat like a pulse. In March, Elias hired a local laborer to assist with renovations. The man, John Kerr, worked 3 days before, refusing to return. His affidavit, preserved in a county folder decades later, states that the cellar smelled of acids and contained iron frames with leather belts. He described Beatrice standing at the foot of the stairs, her hands clasped as if in prayer, though her lips moved soundlessly. By midsummer, rumors spread through the nearby tavern that Elias had written to Lexington requesting medical glassware and preserved specimens. No one in town could read the Latin inscriptions on the crates that arrived by wagon. He unpacked them alone at dusk. Neighbors noticed a faint glow from the basement windows and a sour odor drifting through the orchard. One farmer recalled seeing 2 shadows moving when only 1 lantern burned. Then came the first disappearance. A young domestic named Lydia Harper, who sometimes delivered produce to the Marstons, vanished after stopping by one evening. Her cart was found overturned near the lane. A constable led a brief search and found disturbed soil behind the barn, but without clear evidence he could not proceed. The county docket records his note simply: soil fresh, odor faint. By late autumn, even the mail carrier refused to pass the property after sundown. Letters to and from the house dwindled until none were sent at all. Only once did anyone hear from Elias again: an unsigned notice pinned to the church door, offering payment for specimens of the recently deceased, unblemished. No one admitted replying. By early 1880, the farmhouse stood half-hidden behind frost and fog. The road leading to it curved through bare sycamores, and travelers began taking longer routes to avoid the place altogether. In the village records of Manchester, a passing preacher noted the Marston residence as a house where the air itself feels tampered with. He had been summoned by a concerned neighbor, Mrs. Hannah Clay, who claimed to hear soft, pulsing sounds at night, like a machine struggling to breathe. The preacher's visit was brief. He later testified that Elias met him at the gate, courteous but distracted, his hands trembling as he adjusted his spectacles. When asked about church attendance, Elias replied that the work below demands constant attention. The phrase appeared later in the preacher's journal and became the basis for countless retellings in local folklore. The work below. Beatrice, meanwhile, was occasionally seen in town purchasing salt and lye, though she spoke little. A miller named Robert Dean recalled that her gloves were stained dark, as though she had handled ink or iodine. She smelled of smoke and something sharper, he told a reporter decades later. Not perfume, more like metal. That spring, a second disappearance occurred. A stable hand from a nearby farm, Jonas Lyle, had been sent to deliver a wagon of hay. When he failed to return, his employer rode out to look for him and found the wagon empty at the end of the Marston Lane. No trace of Jonas was discovered, though prints, 2 sets, were found circling the house. One print was bare, the other booted. The sheriff's report filed that April was later misplaced. Only a carbon copy remains in the archives. The ink faded to gray. Word reached the county seat, prompting a quiet investigation. The deputy assigned, Samuel Price, arrived unannounced one afternoon. In his later testimony, Price described finding the cellar door barred from the inside and the faint hum of a mechanism beneath the floor. When Elias finally emerged, his coat was spattered, his expression calm. Price noted that the doctor insisted on calling his cellar a laboratory and referred to his wife not by name but as the subject. Feeling outnumbered and unarmed, Price left under the pretense of fetching a warrant. But by the time he returned 2 days later, the house stood open and empty. Inside, he found evidence of hurried departure. Papers scattered, glass vials shattered, and on the cellar wall, chalk marks forming concentric circles intersected by initials. E.M. and B.M. A small journal, singed along the edges, recorded dates and crude anatomical sketches. Several entries mention solution A7 and post-revival tremors. Later examiners would note the resemblance between Marston's notes and contemporary discussions in the medical literature of Kentucky's frontier schools, where unregulated experimentation was common. The reference appears again in Medicine in Kentucky, citing how rural doctors often pursued secret research away from official oversight. When Price attempted to remove the ledger, he found several pages glued together, as though to conceal the text beneath. He delivered the book to the county courthouse, but weeks later, it vanished from storage without record of withdrawal. The following autumn, Price left the force, moving west and never speaking publicly of the case again. In the years that followed, neighbors reported seeing candlelight flicker in the Marston cellar, though the property remained abandoned. Those who dared to approach claimed to hear faint tapping from beneath the floorboards, steady, rhythmic, almost human. By 1882, the Marston property had become a point of fear and fascination. Children dared each other to run past the gate after dark, while adults spoke of it in lowered tones. The county council debated burning the house to the ground, yet no one volunteered to lead the effort. The structure seemed to repel intrusion. Even the wind changed direction near its walls. In August of that year, a traveling physician from Louisville, Dr. Harriet Monroe, passed through Clay County. She had been corresponding with officials about the rise of unauthorized medical practices in the rural South, an issue often cited in later reviews of Kentucky's medical history. When she learned of the Marston rumors, curiosity overcame caution. She arranged to inspect the house under the protection of the sheriff, bringing along her assistant, Edward Tully, and a single constable. They arrived at dusk. The interior was colder than expected, with condensation on the walls despite the summer heat. Monroe recorded in her field notes that the air smelled faintly of chloroform and candle soot. In the parlor they found fragments of glass tubing, leather straps nailed to the floor, and an overturned chair. The cellar entrance stood open, its door warped. Descending by lantern, Monroe discovered a space roughly 10 feet square. Against one wall rested a wooden table darkened by stains. Beside it, a cabinet containing sealed jars, each labeled by number rather than name. Inside some jars floated fragments of tissue, pale and clouded. The constable refused to continue. Tully noted in his account that Monroe examined each label methodically before stopping at one marked Specimen 12, B. The jar was empty, the glass cracked. Whatever it held, she wrote, was removed recently. Among the debris lay another ledger, smaller than the one Deputy Price had described. It contained brief phrases: Respirata, Ori Revival Limited, subject unstable, and Beatrice insists further trials. Monroe copied the entries by hand and later testified that she believed the experiments concerned suspended animation, perhaps a misguided attempt to restore life to the recently dead. Her statements were filed in Lexington under Medical Irregularities, 1882. News of Monroe's findings spread quietly but firmly. Within months, curiosity seekers from neighboring counties began arriving, hoping to glimpse the cellar. Some claimed to find footprints in the dust, small, bare prints appearing days after the inspection. Others swore they heard whispering behind the walls. Nothing was ever proven, but the accounts kept the story alive. By 1884, the farmhouse had burned. A letter from the sheriff to the county judge, dated September 2nd, simply reads, "Structure lost to fire, cause unknown, no remains found." The land reverted to the state and was left unclaimed for years. Yet in local folklore, the blaze never destroyed everything. Residents told of a traveler who found a vial at the creek bearing the same inscription, A7, and that he died within days of opening it. The site became a quiet ruin. No birds nested in its trees. Even now, rural surveys of Clay County note an overgrown patch along the old road where compasses fail to hold steady. Historians who studied the case linked it loosely to the unregulated period described in Medicine in Kentucky, a time when ambition outpaced ethics, and entire studies vanished with their authors. The official record of the Marston disappearance was never closed. In 1885, the Clay County clerk noted a single line beside the abandoned case number: "Presumed deceased, whereabouts unknown." Yet witnesses continued to surface, each adding new fragments to a story already blurred by time. One such account came from a railway worker, Thomas Ridley, who swore under oath that he met a man resembling Dr. Marston at a station outside Paducah. Ridley claimed the man purchased 2 tickets westward, one stamped Louisville to St. Louis. His companion, described as pale and veiled, never spoke. Though the ticket records for that day were lost in a later flood, the testimony became part of the county's oral archive. "She didn't move like a living woman," Ridley said. "She leaned against him as if bound by something unseen." By the late 1880s, curiosity about the case reached the academic circles of Lexington. Students at the fledgling medical college debated the so-called Marston experiments in private discussions, arguing whether the couple's research represented pioneering science or criminal heresy. A professor, Dr. Langford Gray, referenced the case in a lecture about the dangers of unsupervised experimentation. His notes, preserved at the university, remark, "These rural laboratories breed both progress and tragedy. The line between them is as thin as the skin upon the human chest." That line would later echo through later editions of Medicine in Kentucky, cited as an early example of the region's struggle to balance innovation with morality. Around this same time, a small article appeared in the Louisville Courier-Journal. "Unidentified couple found dead in river cabin. Believed poisoned." The details matched the Marstons: man and woman, middle age, no documents, peculiar instruments among their belongings. The sheriff of Clay County traveled to confirm the bodies, but by the time he arrived, they had been interred in a pauper's grave. The instruments were gone. No photograph survives. Still, Not everyone accepted the conclusion. Decades later, descendants of the Caldwell family, the property's original owners, claimed their grandfather had seen lanterns burning at the ruin long after the supposed deaths. He described faint shapes moving within the light, one tall, one slight, both silent. The old man's recollection, taken in 1910, ends with the line, "If they died, they did not stay buried." Meanwhile, local superstition turned the name Marston into a warning. Travelers passing through the valley were told to keep to the road and never answer a voice that calls twice. Such tales persisted, though none could prove more than shadow and rumor. The remaining fragments, the missing ledger, the burned cellar, the vanished deputy, all left a pattern of absence rather than truth. Even among scholars, the Marston affair is treated cautiously. When the University of Kentucky compiled early medical archives in the 1920s, a curator remarked that the files on rural experimenters show more gaps than pages. It was as if entire sections of history had been quietly erased, leaving behind only whispers and empty folders. By 1887, the old Marston property was surrounded by silence, an island of ash and tangled vines where even hunters refused to linger. Those who ventured close spoke of strange impressions in the soil, as if heavy furniture had been dragged through the weeds. A surveyor for the county, Ephraim Dodd, recorded in his notes that his compass failed near the creek bed, and that a steady vibration passed through the ground, faint as a breath, yet constant. He refused to camp there a second night. That same year, county archives received a sealed envelope from an unknown sender. Inside was a single sheet of parchment covered in Elias Marston's handwriting. The date read March 11th, 1880, 3 months before the couple's disappearance. The ink was brown, the text erratic. Second attempt unsuccessful. Pulse sustained 15 seconds post-cessation. Beatrice insists we must not stop now. No signature followed, but the handwriting matched the earlier ledger. The clerk copied it into the file, unaware that the envelope would later vanish just as the others had. By then, folklore had begun to replace record. Miners passing through Clay County claimed to see a woman standing by the roadside at dusk, her dress torn and her hands clasped at her chest as though restraining pain. She asked for the vial, then disappeared into the fog. No one dared speak to her twice. Even practical men began avoiding the route entirely, calling it the doctor's cut. In 1890, a new family purchased part of the land, the Raines family, intent on rebuilding. They leveled the foundation and converted the remaining bricks into a barn wall. During excavation, laborers unearthed several glass cylinders capped with lead. One shattered upon exposure to sunlight, releasing a smell described as sweet and spoiled. The foreman ordered the rest buried again at the edge of the field. Within a month, 3 workers fell ill with high fever and delirium. The local physician attributed it to contaminated water, yet the Raines family abandoned the site within the year. A generation later, a state geologist surveying mineral content in the area mentioned finding a circle of ground where vegetation will not take root. His notes compared it to chemical burns rather than natural soil composition. Beneath a few inches of ash, he found fragments of curved glass fused by heat, likely remnants of Marston's equipment. The report was never published, only mentioned in correspondence filed at the university. That same university would later expand its historical review of Kentucky's medical past, citing the Marston anomaly, among other unverified accounts of 19th-century experimentation. The compiler of medicine in Kentucky wrote that certain practices in rural districts reflected both ingenuity and moral blindness. Though the author stopped short of naming Marston directly, the context left little doubt. The line between science and obsession had already blurred beyond repair. By 1895, Locals said the creek that ran behind the property sometimes glowed faintly in moonlight, as if reflecting something not entirely natural. Travelers left coins at its bank, muttering prayers before crossing. Few believed the stories, but fewer still were willing to test them. As the century drew toward its close, the Marston affair slipped from the headlines, but not from memory. In taverns across Kentucky, old men still lowered their voices when the couple's names were mentioned. Some spoke of a sickness that had followed their trail, a wasting fever that touched livestock and men alike. County registries from 1898 do, in fact, record an outbreak of unknown flux near the old Marston fields, though no contagion was identified. The physician who treated the first cases described skin cold as marble, hearts beating irregularly, as though struggling to restart. Around that same time, a letter surfaced in Louisville addressed to the editor of the Medical Review of the South. The author signed only as E.M. and claimed to have achieved reversible death under controlled suspension. The editor dismissed it as a hoax, but the phrasing echoed the Marston notes found years earlier. Reversible death. The term reappeared in later studies and was eventually cited in footnotes of Medicine in Kentucky as an example of frontier pseudoscience bordering on the miraculous. In 1901, a field hand named Caleb Morton unearthed a sealed tin box near the site of the burned house while digging a drainage ditch. Inside were two objects, a brass key and a folded scrap of paper bearing the words, "If the heart can be paused, can the soul?" The handwriting, compared by a local historian, matched that of Beatrice Marston. The box was later sent to the county archive, but within weeks, it too went missing. The curator at the time blamed clerical mishandling, though a night watchman recalled hearing glass moving inside a wooden crate that same evening. In the early years of the new century, the story took on a different tone. Folklorists began visiting Clay County to collect the surviving oral accounts. They described a landscape still uneasy, as if the ground had remembered. Locals spoke of a soft humming that rose from beneath the soil after rain, said to be strongest near the old foundation. Some attributed it to trapped gases. Others refused to go near after sunset. The hum became known as Marston's breath. By 1905, the county attempted once more to reclaim the land, intending to build a storage depot. The survey crew abandoned the effort after one of their men, a young draftsman, suffered convulsions while sketching the area. He survived but never returned to work, writing only that the ground moves though it looks still. Documents from that period note the state's growing interest in regulating medical practice, citing earlier scandals as justification. Among those listed were several unlicensed physicians of Clay and Madison counties whose records have been lost or destroyed. Historians believe the Marston case directly influenced this movement, though it was never named officially. A quiet acknowledgement, buried in bureaucracy, that something terrible had once happened and must never be repeated. Even so, whispers persisted. Travelers who camped along the creek reported hearing two voices in the dark, one coaxing, the other pleading. "Just a little longer," the first would say. Then silence, and the sound of water swallowing the words. By 1908, the land where the Marston house once stood was again surveyed for agricultural use. The assessor, James Tilbury, documented nothing unusual except for a depression in the earth where water refuses to collect. Yet in his private journal, now preserved at the County Museum, Tilbury recorded something omitted from the official ledger. "The air quivers as though from distant thunder. My lantern flickered though no wind stirred." He closed the entry with the simple remark, "I will not return." A year later, a visiting professor of anatomy from Cincinnati, Dr. Horace Linden, came to Kentucky on a university grant to study early rural medical practices. He found mention of the Marston experiments in a scattered collection of local reports and, intrigued, traveled to Clay County. He described the site as a wound in the landscape, healed over, yet faintly aching. Linden spent 3 days there, taking soil samples and sketching the remains of the stone foundation. His later paper, Frontier Medicine and the Ethics of Isolation, referenced the Marston name only once, but its tone suggested deeper unease. There are certain inquiries man cannot pursue without carrying the question into his own blood. That same winter, heavy rains unearthed part of the cellar wall. Boys playing nearby discovered a hollow compartment containing fragments of bone and what appeared to be surgical instruments fused by rust. The sheriff ordered them reburied, fearing panic. Still, one of the boys, years later, swore that a piece of the metal was warm like it had been used. Folklore began to take firmer shape. In neighboring towns, people told of a white woman on the hill, seen walking in fog, her gown clinging to her frame as if soaked from within. Older residents swore that she was Beatrice, forever searching for her husband or her lost experiment. The details varied. Sometimes she held a lantern, sometimes nothing at all, but always her steps led toward the river. None claimed to follow her there. By 1910, state reformers pushing for stricter oversight of medical practice referenced past tragedies in Clay County during their hearings. Though never named, the connection was clear to those who remembered. The Medicine in Kentucky compilation, published that same decade, devoted a small footnote to certain unrecorded attempts at suspended animation in the southeastern districts, noting that their outcomes were both unverifiable and ethically void. It was the final scholarly acknowledgment of the Marston affair before the story slipped entirely into rumor. Yet not all traces vanished. A Louisville collector of antiquities, Walter Crane, claimed in correspondence that he owned a brass key stamped with the initials E.M. He kept it in a glass cabinet, but wrote to a friend that some nights it turns cold and the glass fogs from within. Crane's collection burned in a warehouse fire in 1912, and with it perhaps the last physical link to the couple. But locals still avoided the ruins. When asked why, they gave the same answer: because the air there listens. By 1913, the Marston land had become overgrown, a dense weave of briar and oak reclaiming the past, yet curiosity never fully died. That year, a young journalist from Lexington, Clara Whitmore, visited Clay County to write a feature on vanished towns of the South. When she asked about forgotten settlements, several locals pointed her toward the doctor's field. None offered to accompany her. Whitmore's surviving notes, later found among her papers, begin with careful observation. Ground uneven, foundation stones scattered like teeth, the air thick, odor faintly metallic. But her next lines turn uncertain. Heard soft vibration at edge of creek, similar to the hum described by miners. Impossible to locate its source. Her last entry reads, simply, "The hum changes when I move closer." She returned to Lexington, ill and feverish, claiming the vibration still echoed in her skull. She died 3 months later of what doctors termed nervous exhaustion. That same year, an aging clerk named Samuel Price, the deputy who had once visited the Marston house decades earlier, sent a letter to the state archivist. His handwriting shook with age. "You may think them dead. I am not certain. I saw her once, years after. She smiled as if knowing I'd remember." No one ever confirmed the sighting, but Price's letter remains one of the last first-hand accounts from anyone directly tied to the original investigation. The following winter, unprecedented cold froze the nearby river solid. Children playing on the ice discovered what they described as a dark patch beneath the surface, round like a doorway. When adults investigated, the shape had vanished. Whether shadow or illusion, it reignited old fears. Parents forbade their children from approaching the banks for years after. In 1915, the County Council officially removed the Marston property from its public maps, listing it as unintings, habitable ground. Yet travelers still reported strange experiences. A salesman from Bowling Green wrote that his horse stopped and refused to move near the site, ears flat, eyes wide, as though hearing something I could not. Another visitor described a figure standing beside a dead tree, motionless, like a statue of ash. Academic interest briefly flickered again during the 1920s when researchers revisited early medical ethics in Kentucky. Among their case files was a reference to the Marston incident as a cautionary phantom, a term acknowledging the event's blend of fact and myth. They quoted an anonymous physician who wrote, "In pursuit of life, they taught us the stillness of death." The line is believed to paraphrase an older passage from the Medicine in Kentucky compendium, though no one can locate the original wording. By now, the Marstons existed as both legend and lesson. In the towns surrounding Clay County, people recited the story not as history, but as warning, that there are limits to what the living should awaken, and that curiosity, once opened, may never close again. And still, some nights, locals claim to see two lanterns flickering side by side near the riverbank, one steady, one trembling, as if someone were still conducting an experiment the world long forgot. In the autumn of 1917, the Great War drew most of Kentucky's attention, and yet, in Clay County, the old story quietly resurfaced. A detachment of surveyors sent to chart timber routes found themselves camping near the ruins of the Marston property. Their foreman, Lieutenant Roger Bell, later submitted a peculiar field report. Camp stable, but men restless. Repeated complaints of rhythmic sound from beneath ground at night, similar to distant machinery. Soil vibrates faintly under heel. The military dismissed it as fatigue, yet 3 men deserted the next morning without collecting pay. That same year, a local historian named Charles Linton began compiling oral histories from older residents who still remembered the 1870s. In his notebook, now kept at the Berea Archives, he wrote, "Several elders describe a woman who came to their doors in 1883 asking for salt and kerosene. She carried a jar and said it contained her husband's last breath." Linton's notes make no attempt to verify the claim. He merely adds, "The jar was sealed with red wax. She would not let it touch sunlight." By 1919, whispers again reached the newspapers. The Louisville Evening Post published a short article titled, "The Doctor's Field Revisited." The reporter claimed to have interviewed an old miner who spoke of pale fires rising from the earth on clear nights. Skeptics dismissed it as swamp gas, but the details echoed earlier affidavits almost word for word. The article drew renewed attention, prompting a small group of researchers from the University of Kentucky to visit the site. Among them was Professor Edwin Mott, who specialized in early American medical history. His correspondence notes, "The foundation remains detectable, soil compact, unusually sterile, recovered fragment of scorched brass tube stamped with the characters A7. Mott compared it with similar medical instruments of Thews, and concluded it might have held chemical reagents for preservation. Still, he remarked that the alloy was of a type not commonly produced in Kentucky before 1900. This inconsistency troubled him deeply. 2 months later, Mott resigned from his post and left no forwarding address. His last letter, sent to a colleague, contained only the words, "It is not the dead who concern me, but what they tried to bring back." During these years, The name Marston became a kind of rural shorthand for hubris. Preachers in the region used it in sermons. The sin of Marston, they called it, warning that curiosity without restraint invites damnation. Yet outside Kentucky, the story faded from attention, eclipsed by modern science and distant wars. Still, in Clay County, farmers spoke of the night humming. Those who lived near the creek said that after heavy rain, the ground seemed to exhale, a slow, steady pulse felt rather than heard. Some claimed the air above it shimmered, as if warmed from below. Others said they saw footprints where none had walked. No one has built there since. The land remains empty, registered as private, but owned by no one who ever visits. And though the county maps no longer mark the ruins, the locals still know the name, Marston Hollow. The 1920s brought an era of change to Kentucky. Electric light, automobiles, and the slow retreat of superstition. Yet in Clay County, the Marston story endured like a bruise that would not fade. When power lines were first installed along the ridge, workers reported that every compass and magnetometer faltered near the old homestead. The needle stuttered, one lineman said. It couldn't make up its mind. They finished the line but left the poles unconnected across that patch of land. To this day, a gap remains in the records where the route should continue. In 1923, a new family named Fenton settled nearby. Their youngest daughter, Clara, often played at the edge of the property despite her parents' warnings. One evening, she returned home carrying a small vial she said she found in the ground that hums. Her mother, thinking it trash, threw it into the stove. The glass burst before touching the fire, releasing a smell described as like sugar and iron. The entire family fell ill within hours. Their recovery took weeks, and the doctor noted in his report an unusual slowing of the pulse. The Fentons moved away the following spring. A decade later, in 1933, a retired chemist, Albert Raines, began investigating Kentucky's unverified medical cases for a private collection he called The Lost Sciences. He devoted a section to the Marston disappearance, gathering remaining affidavits and letters. Raines believed Elias had been experimenting with anaerobic preservation, attempting to place organisms in a state between life and death through deprivation of oxygen. He sought the pause, Raines wrote, not the end. His conclusions mirrored the observations found decades earlier in medicine in Kentucky, where similar pauses were rumored among unlicensed practitioners in the 1870s. Raines visited the site himself. His field log, dated October 14, 1934, contains only knee entry, low vibration beneath soil, metallic resonance when struck with spade, no echo beyond 10 feet, presence felt. He never published again. His family found his papers neatly stacked but unfinished, his tools rusted with traces of soil unlike any from the county. Locals began to say the land kept what it wanted. Hunters who strayed near claimed to lose sense of direction. One, Thomas Coe, said he heard someone whisper his name, though no one was there. When he turned, he saw 2 dim lights moving parallel through the trees. Lanterns, perhaps, or eyes reflecting the moonlight. He ran without looking back. By 1936, the creek's course had shifted, eating away part of the ruin's edge. During low tide, farmers found curved stones and warped metal embedded in the bank. Some of the fragments bore fine etchings, numbers, formulas, and the letters E and B. A local teacher attempted to catalog them for the county's historical society, but before she could, the pieces vanished from her storage shed overnight. No lock was broken. Only a faint smell of ozone lingered. Even with modern skepticism, something about the place resisted dismissal. Those who passed by still swore the ground there felt hollow, as if something beneath it waited to rise again. By 1938, the region had grown accustomed to its ghosts, yet the Marston story persisted, quiet, unprovable, but stubborn as limestone. That summer, a group of archaeology students from the University of Louisville set out to map forgotten farmsteads across Clay County. They marked the Marston ruin as Site 47KY. Their expedition journals, later recovered, reveal a tone of scientific detachment at first. Within a week, that tone changed. One student, Henry Vale, wrote, "We've uncovered a series of stone rings beneath what may have been the cellar. Alignment precise, forming an ellipse. Soil samples warm to the touch even before sunrise." Another entry from his companion reads, "Every photograph of the rings comes out blurred. We changed the plates twice. The shapes move between exposures." After 3 days, the team abandoned the excavation. The supervising professor, Dr. Ruth Calder, filed an official statement calling the site unstable due to subsoil gases. Yet her personal letter to the dean told a different story. "At night, the earth hums. It seems to breathe beneath you. I fear it remembers what was done here." The letter was quietly archived and never referenced again. Around this time, local miners reopening a shaft 2 miles east reported water seepage unlike anything they had seen, thick, black, with a faint metallic sheen. Tests showed no known mineral composition. An old foreman remarked, "That's no spring water. That's the doctor's work leaking out." Superstition aside, the mine was sealed permanently a month later after 2 men collapsed without cause. By 1940, the county's oldest residents had nearly all passed away, and with them, much of the first-hand memory of the Marstons. Only a few diaries remained, faded pages describing pale lights drifting through fog, or voices speaking from beneath the frost. Still, the story refused to die. A WPA writer, documenting Kentucky folklore, listed it among unsolved vanishings of moral consequence, noting that few legends so consistently resist closure. That same year, a young schoolteacher, Margaret Dorsey, walking home near twilight, reported seeing a man and woman standing by the creek's edge. "They weren't quite solid," she said later, "as if they were made of candle smoke." The man held something in his hand that caught the moonlight. A vial, perhaps, and when she blinked, both figures were gone. Dorsey left the county soon after, never to return. The ruin itself, by then no more than a shallow depression, became a landmark of avoidance. Maps still labeled the valley as Marston Hollow, but only in local circulation. Outsiders passed through without noticing, though their compasses sometimes wavered and radios crackled with static. Nothing visible remained, no structure, no trace of fire. Only that persistent hum beneath the soil, low and steady, as if some long-forgotten experiment continued unseen. The years following the Second World War brought new roads, electricity, and telephones to Clay County. Yet for all the change, no one ever built over Marston Hollow. Surveyors marked it as unfit for construction, citing unstable ground composition in their reports. Those who tested the soil described it as fine as ash, dry even after rain. A geologist named Frank Elridge, sent from the State University in 1948, took several samples for study. His report, though brief, contained a single odd line. Sample emits mild electromagnetic disturbance when heated. He filed the document and declined further work in the area. That same year, 2 brothers, William and Robert Pike, set up a small sawmill a half-mile from the ruins. The mill prospered briefly until an accident took Robert's right hand. He told townsfolk that his blade caught something it shouldn't have, metal or bone, I can't say. When investigators examined the machinery, they found a piece of brass fused to the blade, etched faintly with the letters BM. The fragment was sent to the county seat, but no record of it exists beyond the initial inventory. In the 1950s, local historians made a renewed attempt to document Kentucky's stranger folklore. Among the submissions to the Appalachian Oral History Project was a lengthy account by a woman identified only as Mrs. C. She claimed her grandmother had known Beatrice Marston personally and described her as a woman of great gentleness and terrible conviction. The interview continues. She said Beatrice was not evil, only determined. She believed death was a place one could visit and return from if the heart was guided right. The tape ends abruptly after a loud pop, and the remainder of the reel is blank. By 1956, a state development plan proposed a new highway through the hollow. Construction began that autumn, but stopped within weeks after heavy equipment repeatedly malfunctioned near the site. Engines stalled, batteries drained within minutes. A foreman reported hearing two voices under the rumble of the machines, and the crew refused to continue. The highway was rerouted, leaving a peculiar bend in the road that persists to this day. In local lore, that curve is called the Marston Turn. Travelers say headlights dim there for no reason, and the radio catches whispers even with no signal. A few claim to see a silhouette standing by the guardrail, a man, tall and thin, with something small glinting in his hand. Modern scholars, revisiting early records, note that the Marston file remains the only documented disappearance in Clay County never officially closed. They often reference the footnotes in Medicine in Kentucky, pointing to that era's moral ambiguity and the dangers of unregulated experimentation. Yet none can explain the physical anomalies that still confound the land itself. By the late 1950s, people had learned not to ask questions. The hollow lay quiet again, the hum faint but persistent, a single endless note in the silence of the valley. By the early 1960s, Clay County had changed beyond recognition. Factories, schools, asphalt where once there was mud. Yet travelers who crossed the low ridge at night still spoke of strange distortions around Marston Hollow. Long-haul drivers described their engines misfiring for a mile or two, then starting again as if nothing had happened. One driver, Earl Denby, wrote in a letter to his wife, "The lights went dim, and I could swear I saw two people by the tree line, watching me pass. The woman lifted her hand, slow, deliberate, and the humming from under the tires almost matched my heartbeat." That same decade, the State University's geology department returned to the region for soil mapping. They brought modern instruments, magnetometers, seismographs, radiation counters, and still their readings wavered inexplicably. In their final summary, they wrote, "Anomalous subsoil vibration measured at 3.4 Hertz. No geological cause determined." One of the assistants joked that the ground was still breathing. His laughter faded quickly when the instruments continued to pulse even after being moved half a mile away. In 1965, a team of folklorists from Berea College conducted interviews with residents over the age of 70. Many recalled their parents' warnings about the Doctor's Hollow. One woman, Ella Mae Sanders, recounted a story passed down from her grandmother, how Beatrice once walked the fields holding a vial against her heart, whispering, "Stay warm, my love, stay warm." The folklorists dismissed it as rural myth, yet their transcripts reveal repeated references to the hum, the lights, and the feeling of a second heartbeat beneath the soil. Around that time, local children began to test the legend. On summer nights, they would sneak to the bend in the road, park their bicycles, and listen. Most heard nothing but crickets and frogs. Yet one boy, now an old man, till swears he felt the ground move under his shoes, like a cat breathing beneath a blanket. He never went back. In 1968, during heavy flooding, the creek rose and exposed part of the old foundation once more. Highway crews inspecting erosion found bricks warped into a semicircle, their surfaces faintly fused as though by heat. Inside the ring, weeds refused to grow. The area was quickly fenced off and covered again with fill dirt, officially labeled unstable ground. Unofficially, it was left alone. Researchers attempting to correlate the case with regional events noted that several counties recorded unexplained electrical disturbances the same month the creek shifted. Lines failed, clocks stopped, and one hospital reported that its electrocardiograph machine produced a continuous pulse long after being unplugged. The event lasted only hours and was forgotten by morning. But for a handful of locals who lived near the hollow, that night was remembered differently. They said the hum grew louder than ever before, rising until the windows trembled, then ceasing in an instant. After that, the valley was utterly still. The 1970s brought an age of curiosity back to Clay County. Paranormal investigators, amateur historians, and self-styled scientists all began drifting toward Marston Hollow, drawn by whispers of the hum. Most left disappointed, claiming the place was only quiet and empty. But a few didn't laugh it off. One such investigator, Dr. Leonard Shore, a physicist from Lexington with an interest in low-frequency phenomena, visited in 1973 with portable recording equipment. He camped 2 nights beside the creek. His field notes, now preserved in a private archive, contain the following: vibration consistent, amplitude slight but unnatural, frequency aligns with human resting heartbeat, cannot be geological. The next entry reads only, it reacts to sound. Shore returned home soon after, refusing to discuss his findings. He published nothing else before his death in 1975. Around the same time, locals began noticing subtle changes in the landscape. The creek's path shifted once more, this time cutting closer to the old foundation. Those who visited said the stones appeared blackened, as if burned from beneath. Children who played there came home complaining of ringing in their ears. Their parents forbade them from returning. In 1977, a journalist for the Kentucky Post ran a short column titled "The Hollow That Breathes." It summarized the century-old disappearance of Elias and Beatrice Marston, linking it to contemporary reports of unexplained vibrations. The piece was meant to entertain, but it caught attention statewide. Within weeks, sightseers arrived from Louisville and beyond, hoping to hear the heartbeat of the hollow. Sheriff Paul Merrick quickly declared the site off-limits after several visitors fell ill with nausea and vertigo. The official reason cited was unstable terrain. Despite the warning, a handful of university students ventured in one night that autumn, and they brought tape recorders, flashlights, and a dare. Only one recording survived. On it, faint static builds into a low pulse, steady, rhythmic, unmistakably biological. Then, beneath it, a voice barely audible. "Please, wake." The authenticity of the tape remains debated. 2 of the students never returned to retrieve their equipment, claiming to feel something pressing from the ground. Through the rest of the decade, the county treated the matter as superstition. But quietly, state archivists revisited their oldest files, reopening the Marston docket for the first time in nearly a century. The renewed attention drew the eyes of historians who found an odd consistency in the accounts. Every mention, from 1879 onward, described the same sensation: vibration, faint warmth, and the impression of breathing earth. Patterns too specific to ignore, yet too intangible to prove. One archivist wrote in the margin of the reopened file, "If this is legend, it is the most persistent one we possess. If not, then what still stirs beneath Clay County?" By the early 1980s, the legend of Marston Hollow had taken on new life in Kentucky's folklore circuit. Local radio hosts told the story on late-night programs, pairing the hum with ghost lights and secret government experiments. Yet beneath the exaggerations, fragments of genuine records still surfaced: ledgers, witness notes, and a few strange photographs showing nothing but distortion where the ruins should have been. In 1982, the Lexington Herald published a retrospective titled The Marston Mystery: 100 Years of Silence. It featured an interview with an elderly man named Owen Pike, grandson of one of the sawmill workers who discovered the brass fragment decades earlier. He recalled his grandfather's words: "They weren't scientists, they were searching for a way to keep from saying goodbye." Owen's account was simple, quiet, but deeply unsettling. Sometimes at night, when the air's still, the creek hums low, and you can feel it through your bones, like someone trying to remember how to breathe. Shortly after the article appeared, a small team of graduate researchers from Western Kentucky University returned to the site to test environmental anomalies. Their instruments recorded low-band electromagnetic fluctuations, measurable yet inconsistent. When they attempted to trace the source, all readings pointed downward, to a depth of about 15 feet beneath the original foundation. Excavation was forbidden by the county, citing historic preservation laws, though locals joked it was to keep the doctor buried. One of the researchers, Janet Caldwell, wrote in her personal log, "Standing over the center of the field, you feel watched, not by eyes, but by memory, like something down there still waiting for permission to finish what it started." Her notes were never published in any academic journal, but they circulate quietly among Kentucky historians as part of an unpublished thesis draft. By mid-decade, the hollow was fenced off completely. Signs read, "No trespassing," "Contaminated soil," though no contamination report exists. Those who worked for the county at the time said the order came from state level, though no document confirms it. Still, that barrier did not stop everyone. Hikers and thrill-seekers continued to visit at night. Some returned with recordings of faint rhythmic sounds. Others claimed their watches stopped near the creek. In 1987, a storm uprooted one of the old boundary trees, exposing a section of stone beneath. A photographer passing by captured an image of the pattern before authorities covered it again, a spiral of darkened rock forming a precise circle. The print was examined by a geologist who noted that the discoloration seemed internal, as if the heat had come from within the stone. He compared it to vitrification found in experimental furnaces, though the depth and age made that explanation unlikely. That same year, a historian updated the Medicine in Kentucky entry for a centennial edition, briefly acknowledging the persistent mystery of the Marston affair, calling it a case where devotion eclipsed reason. It was the final time the couple's names appeared in any formal record. Yet the hum, by all accounts, has never stopped. As the 1990s dawned, the story of Marston Hollow was little more than a regional myth, a curiosity tucked between coal mining tragedies and old ghost tales. But for those who lived near the bend in the highway, the legend never fully faded. Drivers still slowed there instinctively, and on quiet nights, they said the radios slipped into a dull static, pulsing like a heartbeat. In 1991, a pair of documentary filmmakers from Louisville, David and Lena Morey, decided to investigate the story for a local PBS special on Kentucky folklore. They interviewed historians, archivists, and the few remaining residents old enough to recall fragments of first-hand stories. What began as a light project quickly turned uneasy. Their raw footage, later donated to the Kentucky Historical Center, contains long silences interrupted only by a low, constant vibration captured on every microphone. "We thought it was a recording flaw," Lena recalled in a later interview, "but the sound followed us, even outside the hollow." When the couple reached the overgrown field once believed to hold the Marston cellar, David used a metal detector. It began to beep in slow, rhythmic intervals. The camera operator laughed nervously, saying, "It's matching your pulse." Moments later, the signal ceased abruptly, as if whatever lay beneath had shifted. The tape ends there, cutting mid-sentence. The film was never broadcast. 2 years later, in 1993, county workers repairing the fence around the restricted zone unearthed something unexpected: a rusted key, small and delicate, stamped faintly with the initials EM. It was logged and sent to Frankfurt for analysis, but before results were returned, the evidence locker was destroyed in a minor fire. The official report cited faulty wiring, though the damage was limited to that single cabinet. That same decade, a young writer named Colin Travers published The Hollow, Who Breathes, a novel loosely based on the Marston legend. Though marketed as fiction, Travers admitted in interviews that he had drawn from letters once belonging to a Lexington doctor who believed the experiment succeeded. Critics dismissed it as Gothic sensationalism, but readers noted the unsettling realism of the details: dates, coordinates, and even snippets of real testimony. Travers refused to reveal his sources. Meanwhile, environmental agencies continued to avoid the area, labeling it unsuitable for excavation. Attempts to pave a rest stop nearby were halted twice when machinery failed inexplicably. A memo circulated among engineers describing electrical interference emanating from subsoil strata. The project was quietly abandoned. Locals by then had stopped calling it Marston Hollow altogether. They referred to it simply as the quiet field. But the quiet was never total. Travelers who parked along the road at night said if they left their engines off and waited, a faint rhythm rose from the ground, steady, patient, neither threatening nor welcoming. One man described it best: "It's like the earth remembering to breathe, just once, every few minutes." And though no one claims to see lights anymore, the county sheriff still replaces the no trespassing signs every spring, because somehow, without fail, they go missing every winter. By the early 2000s, Marston Hollow had drifted beyond the edges of recorded history into the realm of quiet obsession. Internet message boards began circulating grainy satellite images of the site: dark circular depressions, strange heat signatures, blurred pixels. Amateur researchers argued over whether they were artifacts of old mining, swamp gas, or something still alive. Most dismissed it as pareidolia, but a small online community began exchanging information, collecting every surviving name, date, and fragment. One contributor, an archivist named Eleanor Haskins, uncovered correspondence between a 19th-century chemist in Louisville and an unnamed country doctor in Clay County describing compound preservation through induced pulse cessation. The letters, authenticated by watermark and seal, were dated 1878, just months before the Marstons vanished. They mention a formula labeled A7. Historians immediately noted the connection to the vials and ledgers found nearly a century earlier. Haskins sent digital copies to the State University, but the originals vanished en route by post. No trace of them has ever been found. In 2004, a storm swept through the valley, uprooting trees and washing out parts of the old road. When the floodwaters receded, residents discovered something unsettling: the outline of a cellar, newly visible in the mud, shaped precisely like the foundation drawn in Dr. Monroe's 1882 report. Local news filmed the site briefly, showing the blackened stones glistening under sunlight. Within 24 hours, state crews fenced it off again under the pretext of hazardous waste containment. No follow-up coverage aired. That same year, a geology graduate student named Peter Lang attempted to take seismic readings at the Hollow. His equipment captured a repeating signal, a pulse at precisely 72 beats per minute, continuing for nearly 6 hours before fading. The following day, Lang found all his instruments drained of power. In his report, he wrote only, "Consistent with human cardiac rhythm. Source indeterminate." The department chair dismissed the data as mechanical feedback. Lang never returned to the field. Through the late 2000s, scattered reports continued. Hikers hearing muffled voices near the creek, engines dying inexplicably, compasses spinning when held above certain stones. The stories rarely reached print, yet they persisted, shared in diners, gas stations, and late-night calls to local radio shows. "The ground still moves," one caller said. "You can feel it if you stand there long enough. It's not evil, just waiting." Modern historians, cautious but intrigued, revisited medicine in Kentucky to compare old ethics debates about rural experimentation. They noted that the Marston case, though never officially recognized, symbolized a turning point in the understanding of scientific restraint, proof that knowledge without boundary could corrode both mind and soil. And still, the hollow remains sealed, unmarked on tourist maps. The hum, if it exists, belongs only to those willing to stop long enough to hear it. Locals advise against that. "It's not what you hear," one said. "It's what hears you back." The last official mention of Marston Hollow appeared in a 2013 environmental report filed to the Kentucky Department of Natural Resources. Buried within the appendix, under acoustic and magnetic disturbances, lies a single line: "Persistent subsoil resonance observed, area deemed unsuitable for development." No further explanation is given. The coordinates were redacted. By then, the hollow had become more myth than place. The road that skirts it carries no signs. GPS signals falter for several miles. Travelers say the trees grow thicker there, their trunks bowed inward as if bending to listen. On overcast nights, mist collects low to the ground, moving against the wind. A handful of paranormal researchers still make the trip, though most leave with nothing but corrupted recordings, audio that ends abruptly in a rhythmic pulse, steady and human. In 2015, a team of documentarians briefly reopened public interest when they announced plans to excavate the foundation using ground-penetrating radar. Funding was secured, permits filed. Yet 2 weeks before work began, the lead researcher, Dr. Elaine Corbin, withdrew without explanation. Her resignation letter contained a single line: "I have reviewed the preliminary scans. The chamber is not empty." The project was cancelled, and the data sealed by the university. The locals weren't surprised. They've long accepted that some things below that soil should stay undisturbed. The creek still runs black after heavy rain. Animals won't drink from it. And on certain nights, when the air is still and the moon hides behind clouds, an almost imperceptible tremor moves through the ground, a heartbeat buried too deep to be mistaken for wind or machinery. Elders in the nearby town of Manchester still whisper about Elias and Beatrice, though never by name. To them, it's the couple who refused to let go. Some say they were punished for defying natural order. Others believe they succeeded and simply stepped into another state of being. Whatever the truth, their absence feels unfinished. As one old farmer put it, they didn't die, they just moved further underground. Over the decades, many tried to close the file, to mark the Marstons as legend, to fold their story into Kentucky's long history of ghost tales and forgotten tragedies. Yet the evidence, scattered but persistent, suggests something far older and stranger than folklore, a pattern that hums beneath the surface of science and faith alike. And so the hollow remains, fenced, unclaimed, breathing in its own rhythm. The grass above it trembles, though no wind passes through. The soil stays warm in winter. Those who stand there too long describe the same sensation Elias once wrote about, a pulse that should not be there, yet is. No one knows whether it's the earth, the air, or something left behind from the Marstons themselves. But when night falls over Clay County and the valley holds its breath, the locals say the hum returns, soft, steady, patient. As if something beneath Kentucky still remembers.